Welcome around the work stand. We've got Ryan back as our monthly super special guest.
Not a
I'll take
guess.
special, but I don't know about super.
Oh,
Original
we'll try
crew.
that. Yeah, the original crew. We'll try for super next time. We'll just keep those expectations a little bit
Fair
lowered.
enough. Yeah, let me earn super.
Cool. Well, you've been busy. You've been traveling a lot between visiting, doing some retailer visits, and then also doing some events.
Yeah, it's been good to get out. And
Yeah.
so we got to Northern California maybe last month and visited a couple of dealers, a couple of high volume e-commerce dealers, which isn't always the cornerstone of my trips, but this one just made more sense. And it was really invigorating. At a time when some of the industry narrative is around maybe some of the negatives of what are happening right now. And we'll talk later about numbers because it isn't necessarily negative. Man, these couple of dealers, they're just crushing it. And in two different ways. One is, advertising and shipping bikes, approved with vendors. Actually, the other is also one of specialized dealers that is shipping bikes, but just does a ton of business with specialized dropship program. And it was just really satisfying going there and just seeing how large of a percentage of their business is running through Workstand. And we're doing a great job for them.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. Yes, we well, I could use a shift in headlines when I'm
Totally.
We can hear about the bright spots.
I love Bicycle Retailer. I read it religiously. But some of their commentary is a little bit broken record, and it has been for 4 years, and it's I don't know. It may be a little out of touch, I'd say.
So one of the places you were recently was the Bicycle Leadership Conference, right?
Yeah. And it was in Tucson this year. It had been in California for almost as long as I was going, first in Monterey and then Dana Point for a couple of years. But Tucson was, I think, a better fit, more low-key, really easy access to riding. Obviously, I'm a desert person, so that was great. And it was well attended. 300 roughly, leaders from across the industry were there. Some from Europe, which was fun to see, get some different perspectives. But always good that once a year check-in, just having honest conversations with suppliers, getting a sense of where they're at. And the opening remarks were done by Chris Spire from REI, but a long time bike industry executive, chair of the board for People for Bikes, and just such a great mix of pragmatism. He put some numbers up showing sales, inventory, ridership, and optimism. Especially when you're looking at the ridership numbers, they've steadily increased in the last 4 or 5 years. And so even if sales has fluctuated, even as we're in kind of a tricky inventory situation, really once we work through the inventory situation, the industry is quite healthy. And so that was really refreshing. And obviously the industry or the inventory situation at suppliers, especially with certain bike categories, that was the cornerstone of a lot of conversations. But it's working its way through. I shared the stage with 2 other kind of, I guess, resources or experts in understanding industry data. And we talked about a couple of key categories like mountain bike and electric bike. And, for mountain bike in particular, supplier inventories are super high, but consumer sales have really turned the corner. Starting in November of last year, mountain bike sales have picked up. That's both in dollar volume and in units. And the really positive thing is because dealers have really run their inventories so lean that they're backfilling in this kind of just-in-time process. And so that means every consumer sale equals a sale out of supplier inventories. So if we have a solid year, we're going to work through a lot of the existing inventory. Obviously, wholesale prices are probably about as low as they can go. So I think there's now a more predictable off-ramp for this kind of challenge we've been in. And that was really good to hear.
So you mentioned ridership growing, and you said 4 or 5 years. So that sounds like it was in a decent place pre-pandemic, and it's held on a bit. So is that the case?
Yeah, I think if I recall the data correctly, the last or 22 and 23, the numbers were relatively flat. But if you look at the trend line from kind of pre-COVID to last year, I think ridership, I think it was up about somewhere between 3 and 5%. And so obviously that's not I think a lot of people had hoped that COVID was going to be this transformative experience for bike riding in the US. Probably not the case, but the long-term trend is really good.
Yeah.
That's what we like. This is sort of tangential, but I was just curious, especially with this kind of just-in-time ordering approach you just talked about. Is the cost of shipping affecting anybody, or is that kind of leveling out, or didn't come up at all?
Well, like container costs, came down. They were just ridiculous there for a while, and it was really
Shocking,
impacting supplier margins in particular. I want to say that they ticked up again in the last 6 months, but still more into like the normal fluctuations.
Okay.
So suppliers aren't taking the big, essentially margin hits by carrying such high shipment costs right now. And then in talking to some dealers, I was trying to unpack really over the last couple of years how their margins were, and most dealers were really trying to focus on free freight orders, and so shipping costs maybe didn't impact them as much. And it does sound like a number of dealers started more charging a surcharge for certain special orders when shipping costs were higher, and so they were able to offset some of that.
Okay, cool.
So how is we're here at the end of, at the beginning of Q2. So do we have data to look at and get a bit of a picture on what Q1 was like as a whole?
Yeah. And so I was just going over the numbers, wrapping up Q1 last week. E-commerce sales is obviously the metric we all want to point to as the best measure, and that was up 10% in the first quarter.
Wow.
With February being crazy strong. I mean, February was up, I think it was like 22%.
Wow.
And yeah, the big drivers on that is high dollar bike sales. So order volume in the first quarter was actually down slightly, but average order value was up, double digits. And that was primarily driven by bike discounts, especially from Specialized. I mean, Specialized, when they launched their promotion that was, really aggressive pricing, drove a ton of traffic to dealer sites. Looking at just isolating their, consumer views on Specialized product detail pages in February versus the prior year. I mean, like 120% increase over the previous year. So it just drove a ton of traffic. And so it's really a case, that this is a case where the bike discounts are doing their job. They're pulling consumers into the market. And then super interestingly, the average selling price on mountain bikes is also up. So it really looks like, and this is something we talked about on stage at the BLC, the consumers are laddering up into higher performing bikes because they're getting the best deals of their lifetime right now. And so instead of just taking the savings, and putting less money in a dealer's pocket, on the whole, consumers are upgrading essentially, and it's leading to a huge increase in sales. Huge relative. I mean, 10% increase is a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Is that leaving any sort of gap in the entry level bikes in stores? If people are moving up, is that causing a build of inventory or not a decrease in inventory in those lower price models?
Well, I think in the like lower price, hardtails, I don't think it's impacting that demand. And so sales in that category, it's been a couple of months since I really dug into that, prepping for that presentation. But sales were pretty strong in the 29-inch hardtail category. So I think if anything, the high on full suspension in particular is a pretty problematic category for the industry right now. So I'd say the sales are happening where they should be happening. Does that mean that velocity in the like lower end full suspension is slower? I can't back it up because I didn't really look at that point. But Mark, I would suspect you're right that the sales are a little slower, kind of middle of the road bikes.
Yeah.
I mentioned how, kind of sale bikes are driving a lot of traffic right now. The traffic numbers are I love looking at that because consumer traffic is such a good indicator of what demand is. And traffic was way up in the first quarter. Add to cart rate was not way up, but significantly up. I want to say 6% for the quarter. And so those are indications that demand is there and consumer intent is there. And so I'm entering the second quarter, what we'll call the real spring selling season, with a lot of optimism. I mean, if weather cooperates, it's shaping up to be a pretty good season.
That's awesome. Quick backtrack to BLC to do a little humble brag. Ryan, you were honored, right, at the BLC event?
Yeah, Workstand was honored.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, I accepted the 2023 Outstanding Service Award, and that was in large part due to the work that we've done with the People for Bikes in the last several years. When the COVID boom first hit, there was a big void in data. Suppliers in particular didn't know what was happening in the market because, the primary supplier of market data, has a 30 to 60 day lag. And so at that time, things were moving so fast, they needed more real-time visibility. So we rushed to develop the Ecommerce index, which showed volume in sales or dollar sales units, and then also traffic, so that suppliers could get a daily look at what's happening across the Workstand network. And that was really helpful as suppliers were trying to navigate, first cutting orders and then ramping up their orders. And then, it also gave, as the boom progressed and maybe even started to taper, it was one of the first indicators that a supplier could look at in order to start adjusting their ordering. So it was a real honor to accept that. And it was a lot of people here that put work into that. Most notably Liam, who's handles all of our e-commerce data, tirelessly worked and still does to make that happen.
Cool. Well, thank you for accepting that on our behalf.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. Embarrassing. I don't. I don't mind being on stage, but giving a thank you speech is
a different spotlight.
It's not. Yeah. And it was before dinner, so everybody wanted to eat.
Oh yeah, they're like, move it along, man.
Yeah. So I was very respectful of that. I kept it, I think, for me, short. I don't
know. So what else are we look at? We talk about data a lot. Obviously we have data in our own platform. You're tuned into other parts of our industry and outside the industry, but we do talk about search a lot. I mean, is there anything we can glean from search as a leading indicator, or as anything that helps us as we move forward?
Yeah, we look at the Google Search Index, and anybody listening to this podcast or watching can access the same information. Just, I think it's just Google Trends or Google Trends. And you can put in, you can monitor specific keywords or topics over time, and you can drill down into your specific market. So if you're a dealer who really wants to know what's happening with full suspension mountain bike searches or electric cargo bike searches in your market, you've got a daily look at what's happening. So far this year, search volume is relatively comparable to last year. So, I think as I look at it, the softening of the market has stabilized. On our platform, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen an uptick in traffic. I think that's because the discounts are really pulling consumers in, and they're getting exposure to it through a lot of advertising nationwide from the big bike brands. But search traffic is steady. There is a long-term trend that I really want to make sure that shops consider, and that is when we monitor, two general trends. So if we look at the searches that contain best bike, I use as an indicator of somebody's shopping for a bike. And then we use the topic bike shop to see any searches related to that. Over the last couple of years, there's been a steady gap opening up between best bike and bike shop, which I take to mean that that all of the articles out there about consumer shopping behavior are correct. Consumers are thinking first about what product they're going to buy, and then they look at all the different ways they can buy the product and make the best selection. So if 5 or 10 years ago, a consumer would search bike shop, go to the shop, find the right product, that has inverted. And is that bad news for bike shops? Absolutely not. You just now have to make sure that you're focused on competing for those product-related searches. And of course, that is our strength. All of our product detail page are optimized for Google. We have the integration with Google local listings. We have experts on hand to help with Google advertising. And so we can certainly help shops compete in that area. But I really want everybody to remember that, winning consumer business is no longer about having a prominent sign in front of your store. It's about showing up in search.
Yeah, the sign lives somewhere else now. That really makes sense, because what we've seen with those local inventory ads and just general Google shopping in general is that it used to be hyper focused on sell product. But because of the placement of those ads at the very top of a page, and what felt like the majority of searches being about things, and this data is backing that up, that's why they've become such a good awareness tool. So I think a lot of times people, they start that search that way for the thing first, but then they go, oh, I know where that store is. And it's right there at the top of the page. And that's the only way you can get to that section of the page is in those shopping ads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that section is going to preference, local businesses. So
yeah,
that's nice. Oh, yeah. Google loves using proximity. They love showing you that something's 5 miles away or
that's
closer.
a question I get a lot too. But when we talk about those services is, well, how do I compete with these big national players? Like, well, mainly because Google preferences and wants to provide a local search to the searcher. Because that's by and large, they want that. The consumer wants to know if it's close to me. I'd much rather it be close to me than not. So that's one of the main ways that you do compete, and another great reason to be in those searches.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I had another case over the weekend where I needed this adapter for a hose faucet, and so I just searched for the thing, and I saw that Lowe's had it around the corner. I saw that Amazon had it, and then it just put me in a spot of just making the choice. Do I want to go pick it up? Do I have other things I need to get, or do I just want to add it to my Amazon cart? And I drove to Lowe's because I always need something from the hardware store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. What else in that data, that search data, did we see? Are there what's the category status? You mentioned earlier that mountain bikes sales were good. What are the other categories that are driving that, or at least that we see in that search data that could be driving sales in the store?
Well, in the interest of time, I'll focus on the most important, and that is electric bikes. So, tying the search data into the Bicycle Leadership Conference discussion, electric bike search volume is by far outpacing just general bike topics. So if bike is stable, electric bike is still on the upswing. Now, search data and sales data say the same thing, which is the market did largely level off between 22 and 23. So a lot of the discussion at the BLC was around e-bikes is still the fastest growing category from a dollar contribution standpoint. It has grown to, I believe, the second largest category in the space. But the market in the U.S. does seem to be maturing. So does that mean basically this double-digit growth that we saw in the run-up to 2022 has likely stabilized into a more kind of predictable and probably healthier growth level, in kind of single digits. That is going to, ideally, make it easier for dealers to understand what to stock, how much to stock. And so I think that'll be a real positive. But, a lot of the discussion was about e-bikes, and especially in the transportation segment. So, and remember, transportation isn't really commuting to work anymore. It's taking the kids to school. It's going to the store. And in many, maybe not replacing all the cars in a house, but replacing the cars for some trips. And a real emphasis on helping make sure that the bike industry doesn't just focus on the recreational aspects of e-bikes, like e-mountain, e-road, super fun, obviously a strength for the bike industry. but also really making sure that we've got that more approachable messaging, images, in order to make sure that just a family looking to offset some of their car travel find a home at a local bike shop.
Yeah, I feel like we're seeing that proof in our communities in a lot of places, especially some of our more bike friendly places like Fort Collins, Colorado. I love seeing you see someone, with their e-cargo bike and like a couple kids on the back. I'm not quite the market for that unless I'm like loading some cats on there, which could be amazing.
They might love it.
Noodle going for a ride. Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, it's cool to see.
So what's next on your agenda? More travel? What are we doing as a company? Will we be attending things?
Where are we sending you?
Yeah, so I'm skipping Sea Otter. Instead, 2 members of our brand relations team will be there. So Matt and Chris will be at Sea Otter, basically walking the show, advocating for dealers. And that's a big part of our role in the industry, is just really reminding suppliers about the production capabilities of bike shops, making sure that suppliers understand the importance of getting us product content quickly and understand the value of things like supplier sync. And so Matt and Chris will be walking around proselytizing about that. In May, I am going to the MBDA Retailer Summit, hosting, I think, more of kind of a roundtable at that event. That'll be good. Bicycle Leadership Conference, there were only 2 dealers there, whereas the MBDA Summit will be almost exclusively bike dealers, so that'll be fun. And then in June, I'm mixing things up, and I'm going to a real-world conference called the Collision Technology Summit that's going to be in Toronto. So I'm going to go, a step more in the technology space, learn a little bit, visit a dealer or 2 up there.
That's cool. I didn't know what that event was, but I'll go to Toronto.
I'm looking forward to it. I have found that hotels are incredibly expensive there.
It's a pricey place in general, I think.
Yeah. I'm looking at cheap hotels along transit lines. So fingers crossed I find something.
Cool.
So one of the big things, big hopes we have for you joining this is to get some questions answered. And we have 2 questions this week.
Nice.
So let's take a look at those. Suzie, if it's okay, I'm going to talk about the first one because that's the one I tend to have a lot of input on. So the question is, when will Workstand POS be able to replace Lightspeed? And I know how I'd answer that. And in a short way, for some, it could be now. But Ryan, how would you address that question?
Yeah, and I agree. For some, it is now. Well, first, it's important to note that that's not the goal with the point of sale. Lightspeed's a great partner. I think roughly half of our website clients use Lightspeed, and it works great. Our target market is, the 30% of dealers who don't have a point of sale system or have an outdated one. But the reality is we found that the most of our calls that do come in are Lightspeed dealers looking at their options, and our feature set, I think, is competitive for the actual business needs of a lot of the dealers that do call. If they're looking apples to apples, does our feature set match Lightspeed? We're not there yet. Lightspeed's been in the market for, I think, almost 15 years. But we're making a ton of headway. And so a number of dealers are saying, well, let me get started now. We're really transparent with where our roadmap is. And I think they're very happy. And then, many others are just giving us some feedback that say, call us when something is ready. But Mark, you tell me, I believe about half of our signups are people who have migrated from Lightspeed. Is that right?
Yeah, they are, because I think a lot of those stores that do they're smaller stores. They're not what you call a power user of Lightspeed. For that power user that's into all those sections of Lightspeed, again, like you said, we're not there yet, but there are some that are using it at the very basic level. They're tracking inventory, they're ringing up sales, they're processing credit card orders. And for those that have made that move, we're just a good, we're there. We're there for a lot of that. And for some of them, we're almost there. And that's good enough for now. They're excited to have this option that's all in one place. And it's not so much about the cost necessarily. Certainly there can be some savings, but it's really more about just this one place to have it all together. And they've got such experience with our support team and history with us that it just made sense. But for sure, we've had some great conversations. And again, like you said, there's some that look at it and go, you're on the right track. It's just not quite there for me yet. So we're keeping those lines of communication up. We're getting great feedback from a lot of places, including some of those dealers.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's important to note that like we certainly do have some strengths that are, really best in class in the market, and that's the data. We have far more product data than any other supplier out there, and not just manufacturer data. I mean, we've got rich product pages for, hundreds of thousands of items, and then we're tied into so many warehouses. So, I mean, you're creating a sale and you can look right into Trek, Specialized, QBP, HLC, and more's inventory so that if you're going to add an item, it's an item that's in stock. Nobody can do that. So I continue to encourage dealers to take a look.
For sure. And I think one of the places that has shown to be super valuable is in the service department when you're writing up a work order, to be able to see both what you have in stock and what and where something's available really helps these dealers do a better job with their service customers and setting expectations on when a repair might be available. It's been very powerful. Well, that's the first question. Suzie, what's the next question?
Yeah. And so just to emphasize, we have these two questions. These questions come up very often, routinely asked in lots of different ways. Mark gets them, on the phone, face to face. Ryan, you probably got some of these maybe while you're out on your travels, showing your face to the people.
Yeah, this next one is a part of almost every conversation anymore.
Yeah, it's huge. It comes up all the time. So this question is, do I have to pay for Google Ads to show up in local search results? In short, no.
Yeah. We talked about it earlier. Like it's just, your website is organically well suited to win search. Mm-hmm. You've done a ton of work talking about the free Google product listing. Remind people what that is.
Yeah. So kind of take it back one step is essentially like your Workstand website is built on a foundation of great SEO. Another layer of that is going to of course be the product catalog that is huge to help draw organic traffic. And of course your location pages. So because we have those kind of like, I say auto-generated, but you can enhance them, highly encourage you enhance them with localized content. That is really kind of that foundation to provide great SEO. So that's kind of baked right in. And then you can kind of take additional steps, including free options. So Ryan we mentioned the Google local listings a couple different times. There is an integration within your Workstand website and available with any website subscription. And you can share your local products that are available for in-store pickup for free on the Googles.
Now, I think it's worth noting that, I mean, if you do want to make sure that you're growing your market share and not just maintaining it, the reality of the world is today that the average bike shop doesn't have nearly the traffic volume as in particular a brand does. So if a customer is searching for a certain type of Giant bike, Giant's website is going to show up before the dealer. Mm-hmm. And you could say the same thing for a lot of aftermarket. So if you really want to make sure that you're showing up on page one as much as possible, paying for ads is helpful. And the same with like location and service. Mm-hmm. Yeah, your site organically probably performs well, but why not show up at the very top? And so just running some basic ads, it just leaves less to chance.
Yeah, we talked about those. Now, when you search for a product, you're kind of like the default or like, I don't know, it's like the all tab on Google, you're going to see those shopping ads. And so like we said, it's going to preference proximity. So kind of you don't have to strictly compete with those big online sellers on budget. You're going to. Yeah.
And I think what I've found, I've been doing marketing for bike shops for, I hesitate to do the math, approaching 20 years. When I first got started, ad budgets were spread, well, it's not that they were spread thin, but there were some big dollar commitments. I mean, radio ads, billboards. Print. And today, those big expenses aren't there. And so this is just the best place to put your marketing money is the digital space. Your website first, email marketing, Google advertising.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like marketing has always been, it's a an expense sometimes hard to justify. You don't see traditionally, you haven't seen, a really easily calculatable return on investment. But I mean, there's the kind of the digital shift, and especially utilizing your website, you can measure it more closely, and that's a benefit.
Excellent. Well, Ryan, this is great as usual to have you back here, like we did in the beginning. So we'll wish you well in the upcoming travels. We'll see you again next month. Hopefully the travel doesn't get in the way of this visit. I'm certainly enjoying it. I know our viewers and listeners are, because the last episode with you was the best performing episode we had since we did the Workstand rebrand. So it's resonating, and we really appreciate you making the time to come share all this with us.
Well, that's great. And the next episode is going to be really important, because April data is going to be really telling of the trajectory of the spring. So yeah, come back next month and we'll have real-time results.
Outstanding.
Well, I guess we'll see you around the Workstand.